Welcome to Hammond, Indiana.
Hammond, downtown Hammond.
A city that has weird borders, is declining, decaying, forgotten, and downtown looks rather eerie. While there still are some nice-looking neighborhoods in town, and while it hasn't fallen nearly as bad as its next-door neighbor in Gary, only a moron that sniffs glue as a part of their morning routine would stand there and argue against the notion that Hammond has seen better days. Although, give the city credit, as there is an aggressive plan in place to revive its lifeless downtown. We'll get into all of that and more throughout this video. I'm going to start things off talking about the weird borders following a brief description. Hammond is home to about 76,000 people these days, a far cry from its peak population of 111,000. The city is about a half-hour drive south from the Loop, or depending on the traffic, it could be an hour and a half. Speaking of traffic, this is the Borman Expressway. It cuts across the city from west to east, and it sees an average of 210,000 vehicles per day. That's more than twice the amount of residents who live in Hammond, so basically throughout the course of any given day, there are about 200,000 people, give or take, that pass through Hammond and probably don't even give the city a second thought. That being said, here's something that many of the hundreds of thousands of commuters passing by might have never heard about.
So here's this unique historical marker on the edge of Hammond. Hammond borders Chicago, actually, so that means it borders the state of Illinois. And here is a state boundary marker that was put here in, 1838, I believe? 1833. Okay. 1833. There you go, right there. Then here's this archway. You go underneath it, you're in Indiana. You're in Hammond, Indiana over there, and where I'm standing right here, I'm in Chicago, Illinois. And here's this state line, Indiana, Illinois plaque, State Line Plaza. This is actually a bike trail. It's a pretty popular bike trail. I saw probably about 8 or so people riding their bike up and down that street. Goes over to Calumet Beach in Chicago. Looked like a pretty nice city park, actually. But yeah, here's the bike trails that heads into Indiana. And then straight back into Chicago. And then, of course, there's Lake Michigan. But yeah, this archway, pretty unique.
Believe it or not, this is one of the oldest standing structures in all of Chicago, all the way down here on the border with Indiana. The archway was indeed built in 1838, by the way, while the monument was erected in 1833. But this is only one of the notable things with Hammond's borders. Not only is there some drama with Gary that we'll get into in about 5 minutes from now, but first, we're going to head towards the furthest southern stretch of Hammond's border with Illinois. There's actually a wall.
I would build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me.
That separates it from Calumet City, Illinois for a 4-block stretch. The wall is a part of a boulevard-like road with a grassy median that continues on for a mile before there's a road connection between the two cities. The city of Hammond actually cut off road connections to Calumet City along this stretch back in 2005 to cut down on east-west cross traffic stemming from Calumet City, along with an effort to reduce burglaries and crime stemming from Calumet City. I'll explain the irony from that here pretty shortly, but then fast forward to 2014 and plans were announced by the Little Calumet River Basin Development Commission to build a wall.
The wall just got 10 feet higher.
Maybe not 10 feet high, but a wall that's about 4 feet high, otherwise known as a tieback levee. The levee, or wall, or whatever you want to call it, was designed to prevent floodwaters from a 100-year flood. While there already was a levee built along the Little Calumet River not even a half mile to the west of the Indiana-Illinois border, The wall was built on the Indiana side with the argument that the higher levee would be needed to protect the properties in Hammond from a 100-year flood, and that the levee in Illinois wasn't high enough for that type of a flooding event. Apparently, the wall took a potential 150 homes out of a floodplain, which lowered flood insurance premiums for those residents. Of course, Calumet Park residents saw it as Hammond further attempting to create a stronger boundary between their city and Hammond. Calumet Park resident Kevin Dean,
"What up, Kevin Dean?"
told the Northwest Indiana Times back in 2014, when this wall was being constructed, that this wall was not for water control, rather the wall was for people control. Hard to argue against why he or anyone else in Calumet City would feel that way, though, especially when back in 2005, the city of Hammond pretty much flat out admitted that it was for people control when they eliminated all the road connections between the two cities for a mile stretch. To add further context, Calumet Park, Illinois is historically black, while Hammond is historically white, especially in the area of the city by the flood wall. Today, white people only make up about 38% of Hammond's population. Most of it is Hispanic. That being said, a big part of that stat still remains true today, as black people make up 75% of Calumet Park's population, while black people make up only 23% of Hammond's population. Plus, economic differences, historically, have been pretty significant between the two communities as well. But, you know what? It's funny how things change sometimes, isn't it? It's really funny how some things can change over time, because today, Hammond finds itself facing a lot of the same problems that Calumet City does. In fact, Hammond actually has a higher crime rate today than Calumet City does. Plus, the median household incomes are like a carbon copy of one another. It wasn't always that way, but it is today, and the poverty rates between the two communities are pretty much identical as well. So, while Hammond proudly admitted that they removed all of the road connections between the two cities back in 2005 and proudly justified it by saying that it will help cut down on crime and it will help cut down on added cross traffic, which would raise the quality of life for the residents on the Hammond side, it's actually Calumet Park that should be thankful that they have protection of a 4-foot wall. You know? It's just funny how things play out sometimes. One community thinks it's much better than the other in every way, shape, and form, and wants nothing to do with its neighbor and tries to establish some firm boundaries, but in all reality, it's actually Calumet Park that benefits from the boundaries that Hammond paid for. So if you're in Calumet Park, yeah, I wouldn't have any problem at all. I would feel safer. I would be saying, yeah, Hammond, thanks for building that wall. Maybe you can build it a little bit higher.
The wall just got 10 feet higher.
Thanks, Trump. Yeah, thanks for that. Well, anyway, on the Hammond side of the wall is the Forest Ivanhoe Historic District, which consists of 25 homes, mostly mansions, that were built between the 1920s and 50s. Fun fact, as upon the initial construction of the subdivision in the 1920s, Al Capone partially financed it, which convinces me that the Illinois and Indiana state line should be renamed as the Al Capone line. He seems to have bootlegging roots in all of the towns in and near the state line. Anyway, it's a pretty nice looking, wealthy neighborhood. You can't deny it. Only a very small part of the city of Hammond looks like this today, though. Now, let's head on over to the opposite side of town. This is what's commonly known as the Hessville neighborhood, and here you'll see that Hammond has done a similar thing with its border with Gary. This is 165th Street, which comes to an end at Klein Avenue. On the other side in Gary, the street is called 9th Avenue. And when looking at this, you can easily tell that this used to be an overpass, but it certainly isn't that anymore, because in 1981, Hammond closed it off, leaving only 2 surface road connections between Hammond and Gary.
This is the end of 165th Street in Hammond. Right there, that's the end of 165th Street. And sometime back in the 80s, the city of Hammond closed that off. It's supposed to connect with Gary on the other side, but they closed it off for reasons that they cited for flood control, because floodwaters from the other side would leach over into this part of Hammond. But it's been closed off ever since.
Just east of the Klein Avenue overpass is a boggy area. In June of 1981, a flood occurred along Gary's border with Hessville, and, 165th Street turned into a canal of some sorts as floodwaters headed underneath Klein Avenue from the boggy area. The problem with the floodwater that was heading through was that it was contaminated with toxic chemicals from an abandoned dump in Gary, just east of Hessville.
So this is the end of 9th Avenue in Gary. I'm going to zoom in. This is the end of 9th Avenue in Gary. And that's the Klein Avenue Expressway. And through those patches of grass is where I just stood a moment ago. 9th Avenue Superfund site. Yeah, this is Gary, and it took me about 10 minutes to get to the other side of this overpass here. And it actually makes sense now, the 9th Avenue Superfund site, why Hammond closed that off for flooding purposes. I can understand their argument anyway that they are making of why they closed it off, because floodwaters, they said, would leach into Hammond whenever it got really, whenever there was a major downpour. Before they built a city here, this was just a huge low-lying swamp area. Both Gary and Hammond were built on top of what was a natural low-lying wetland. So whenever it rained, the water table is pretty high here as it is, so whenever it rained, it would flood and leach over. And if this is a Superfund site, that makes a lot of sense.
Back then, according to the Northwest Indiana Times, apparently the EPA assured then Hammond Mayor Edward Ruskowski that the chemicals from the abandoned dump were quote-unquote so diluted that it would be no problem to Hessville. Well, they couldn't have been more wrong, because Hessville resident at the time, Frank Fontanier,
what up, Frank Fontanier?
Ended up looking like a fool with his pants on the ground, or should I say, looking like a fool with his pants on fire. Somehow, when he was playing in the floodwaters in the area that I've been talking about, Frank's pants caught on fire. He used floodwater to try to put out the fire, but because the floodwater was heavily contaminated with chemicals that stemmed from the toxic dump in Gary, the fire only grew from the contact with the contaminated floodwater. Frank survived, but suffered major chemical burns. Anyway, shortly after that flooding event in 1981, Hammond blocked off the 165th Street and 9th Avenue overpass with fences on both sides. Gary officials came by to remove them, saying that it was a traffic hazard, only for Hammond to put them back up on their side. Hammond justified the action by saying that it was to prevent contaminated floodwaters from entering the Hessville sewer system. Yeah, okay, like a chain link fence is going to stop floodwaters from coming through. Well, not long after that, Hammond constructed a 9-foot-tall sand-filled dike on their side of the overpass. Shortly after that, they built a 4-foot concrete wall to give the dike some sort of structural integrity. Hammond said that the blockade was going to be temporary and it will be removed once Gary takes care of the toxic chemical runoff from the abandoned dumps. Well, the action gave the city a negative image in the eyes of mainstream media.
That's got to be racist.
Gary residents and officials were really upset by this action from Hammond, saying that it was racist and that it was an action that Hammond has wanted to implement for a long time to keep people from Gary out of their city, and they used the toxic dump as a scapegoat for the real reason behind the blockade. Now, this was obviously something that was done a long time ago, before I was born, but while I would like to side with Hammond on this one, I can't fully do that because, according to the Northwest Indiana Times, the city resisted finding other alternatives to solve the problem, including not accepting funding from the federal government regarding infrastructure upgrades, which tells me that there is a motive to just try and remove connections with Gary at all costs, because people accept free crap, especially cities. They will accept government handouts like nobody's business. But my whole thing is, for Hammond, if that's a part of your motive, to block off connections with Gary and Calumet City, just come out and say it. You know what I mean? Everybody knew it. Everybody knew what Hammond was trying to do back then. They were obviously trying to block off connections with Calumet City and Gary because they thought that they were a much better city than the neighboring cities. And they just felt like having Calumet City and Gary as neighbors lowered the quality of life for their residents, so they wanted to build a wall and block them out as much as they could. And everybody saw it, everybody knew it, but you know what? Hammond didn't want to admit it out loud. Well, tough balls, Hammond. You are the Calumet region. You are the region, and you might as well own it because there's not a damn thing that you can do about it.
He had great credibility until he said that. Now it's like, where did he come from?
I mean, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being a part of the Calumet region, but it seems like Hammond did everything that it could to remove itself or to separate itself from the Calumet region back in the day. And yeah, just doesn't work that way. You know who owns being a part of the Calumet region? You know who owns being a heavily polluted city and doesn't care what anyone else thinks and builds up their downtown and puts together a popular festival that people from all over come and visit the city for? Whiting. Go check out that video if you want to see more. What the city can do something about, though, is redevelop their downtown, and apparently there's a plan in place to do just that.
So I'm here in downtown Hammond, Indiana on a Saturday evening. It's still kind of summer, early fall, late summer, September 7th, and there's nobody out. Nobody. There's an interesting stamp on this building right here. Gold something flour. Washburn, the word right above gold, it looks like that's Washburn. Easy to bake, bottom left. Interesting. Nothing but cars passing by here on the main street. Nothing at all. This looks like a cool older hotel. Looks like there's some apartments above. Hotel LaSalle. LaSalle Hotel and Grill. See if I can zoom in a little bit on that. Not sure if this used to be a theater over here. It's right across the street from this older church building. Looks like somebody tossed their meal here on the ground. Look at that.
Hammond saw a peak population of 111,000 back in 1960, but today that number is down to 76,000. That's a decline of 32% over a 60-year stretch. Not good. And also, not surprising that downtown looks the way that it does when knowing all of that. Just like its neighbors that historically the city felt like it was better than, Calumet City, Gary, Hammond has seen the same decline with no signs of stopping anytime soon. Although, I should say that Hammond hasn't declined nearly as dramatically as Gary has. And ironically, while Hammond has been declining over the last 60 years, the city has actually overtaken Gary as being the largest city in the region because Gary has been falling so much faster. Well, unlike with generations past, the current leadership of the city seems to be owning the fact that their city has got some real issues, and it appears that they're trying to address it, so good on them. They've helped put together what's called the Downtown Hammond Master Plan. What I really like is that the first paragraph of the article starts out by not sugarcoating anything and flat out saying, hey, look, we suck right now. There's no life in downtown, but you know what? We want to do something about it once and for all. So yeah, good on them. That's how you start a true effort on redeveloping a downtown, by a complete acknowledgement of things not being right. And I get the feeling that previous generations of leadership in Hammond wouldn't have been able to do that. They wouldn't have been able to take accountability like that, probably because they were a big part of the problem. Just safe to assume that anyway. But not this round of leadership. No, they want to make a change. The plan will aim to recreate downtown Hammond into a walkable neighborhood with new buildings, redevelopments of existing buildings, and a network of pedestrian paths. And cool, I hope the plan goes through, and I hope that it works out in the long term, I really do. I know some of you think I'm a little bit too negative, but no. I think this would be a great thing if all this gets put together and life gets brought back into the city, because Hammond has been seeing decline for such a long time. When I came through, things were in the beginning stages of the master plan, and I'm sure that things have progressed a little bit since I stopped by to film this video, which was about 9 months prior to me uploading this video. One part of the plan includes a more centrally located commuter rail station that will connect Hammond to Chicago. A market study by Zimmerman Volk Associates pointed out that the downtown area of Hammond currently is so unwalkable, yet easily fixable, and it looks like the city is doing what it takes to fix it. Making downtown Hammond more appealing could have a significant impact on the city's future trajectory. The things that the city has going for it is that it is in the Chicago metro area. There's a commuter rail, which is something that appeals to young professionals. It's Indiana taxes rather than Illinois taxes, and it's a large city with large city infrastructure. If downtown can change its appeal, it'll not only bring in new residents, but also new businesses. And right now, Whiting by far and away has the best downtown in the group of cities that hug the Lake Michigan shoreline within the region. There's no reason why Hammond can't hold that title once they complete some projects and create some positive momentum. One part of the project that was already completed by the time of me filming this video was the main street through downtown, that being Homan Avenue. This is what the street looked like before. Now, I'm not always on board with these quote-unquote road diets that have been trending across the country over the last decade, but in some cases I am, such as in the case of Hammond, because it's not like Homan Avenue is a super crazy busy thoroughfare to get people from one part of town to another, and even if it was, there's Calumet Avenue about a half mile to the east that's a continuous north-south thoroughfare that can help relieve congestion. So, in the case of Hammond, I think it's a step in the right direction. For this design, they used diagonal parking in the middle of the road, along with additional side street parking, which encourages people to drive slower, which in return creates a more pedestrian-friendly environment, which is what the city of Hammond is going for. All in all, the downtown Hammond master plan is aiming for 50,000 square feet of new retail space, 2 new parks, and 1,000 residential units. And hopefully, if I'm able to come back in 5 years, I'll see a much different downtown Hammond. Lastly, when you look around, you can tell that this used to be a happening place. I mean, you don't just build all of these tall buildings for nothing. And you can tell that there used to be a lot more of these buildings here back in the day. So you might be wondering, what happened? Well, downtown Hammond used to be a bustling retail area. Most people believe that the decline in downtown Hammond can solely be attributed to the River Oaks shopping mall in Calumet City, Illinois. The giant mall opened up in 1966. Following that, several industries closed throughout Hammond in the 70s, industries that employed a lot of people, such as American Steel Foundries, Pullman Standard, and Rand McNally. By 1981, Encyclopedia Chicago says that only St. Margaret's Hospital, which I'll show you in a little bit, and the First Baptist Church continued to prosper in downtown. Nothing else. Have any good video ideas? Do you live in an area that would make for a good video? Better yet, do you want to show me your hometown, city, or area? Follow me on my other social media accounts and feel free to send me a DM. This hospital doesn't have any social media accounts anymore, at least not any active ones, so don't send these guys a DM.
So I'm near the intersection of State Line Road and Ogden Street here in Hammond, and back in 2022, this hospital behind me closed. It's the Franciscan Hospital. It had about 220 beds. It was built back in 1898, but Franciscan decided to close this hospital due to financial concerns, and it left the largest city in northwest Indiana without a hospital. That's right, not a single full-serve hospital in the largest city in northwest Indiana. Franciscan replaced it with other hospitals. I believe there's one in Munster. But yeah, Franciscan replaced this with other hospitals in some more wealthy suburbs elsewhere.
I know that Hammond is a city that's on the decline and all, but there's a lot of people who still live here, so it's kind of mind-blowing that the city doesn't have a hospital currently. There is a hospital in East Chicago that's 4 miles away from the former hospital site, and then there's the Community Hospital, which is 4.5 miles south in Munster, and right next to it is the Franciscan Health Center in Munster that officially replaced the facility in Hammond. So it's not like there isn't nearby hospitals in close range, but it's obvious that the closure of this hospital was a big blow to the community. Hammond Mayor Thomas McDermott Jr.
What up, Thomas McDermott Jr.?
said that the hospital closing was a tragedy and continued to rip on the organization that is Franciscan Health by saying that the reasons behind the closure was driven by greed. The mayor also stated that the city's fire department had brought 27,000 patients to the ER over the previous 5 years. Meanwhile, the hospital justified their decision by saying that it was averaging fewer than 3 inpatients a day. Franciscan also said that with closing their Hammond facility and bringing those resources to their Munster and Dyer facilities, that patients could see even better care at those facilities than what could have been provided if they kept their Hammond hospital open. I kind of side with the mayor on this one, unless Franciscan is right that they just weren't seeing any patients at all, because at that point it's kind of hard to justify keeping a place open with operating expenses, but I don't think that that was really entirely true. Anyway, the mayor continues to say that Franciscan Healthcare has billions in the bank,
Billions and billions of dollars.
and they pay no taxes. He continued to say that a part of their mission is to help poor people, but now they're running away to Dyer and Munster, where the population is significantly wealthier than what you see in Hammond. Continuing to say how greedy and rotten it is. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Well, Franciscan was in the process of demolishing the hospital when I stopped by. The hospital ended up donating the lot to the city of Hammond for the site to be redeveloped. Portions of the property will be used by Purdue University Northwest, the Hammond Academy of Science, and at the time of me making this video, plans to use up the rest of the property have been undecided. Now, what has already been decided and can't be changed is the city's history. The first property owners in the area were Ernest and Carolyn Homan, hence the name of the city's main street, who purchased 39 acres of land along the Grand Calumet River, where they owned a stagecoach shop. Most of the land that was to become Hammond remained unsettled until 1869, when the George H. Hammond Company purchased 15 acres from the Homans for a slaughterhouse. Shortly after the slaughterhouse was built, Hammond saw its initial development, and the city incorporated in 1883. By 1895, the slaughterhouse employed as many as 1,500 workers. Hammond was a blue-collar town from the start, as the city was made up of German immigrants. In 1894, Hammond residents played a big role in the Pullman strike, which began in Chicago when workers for the railroad company fought back on wage cuts and layoffs. In Hammond, local railroad workers refused to handle Pullman cars, as Hammond was the last stop on the railroad to Chicago. Violence erupted during the strike, which forced federal troops to step in, as they shot and killed a local carpenter. In 1901, a fire destroyed the slaughterhouse, which eliminated 1,500 jobs. Another notable industry that set up shop in Hammond was the Standard Steel Car Company in 1906, which employed 3,500 workers. Hammond eventually became a blue-collar residential city as time went on, while Whiting, East Chicago, and Gary saw stronger industrial growth. Moving through the timeline, and a housing boom came through in the 1920s, followed by a strong presence of retail and office buildings in downtown. Subdivisions south of downtown Hammond advertised to potential home buyers with slogans like "out of the smoke zone and into the ozone" due to the smokestacks that dominated the Lake Michigan shoreline. By 1960, all of the land in Hammond had been developed, and that's when the city hit its peak population, 1960. And unfortunately, as I've mentioned a few times already throughout this video, It's just been downhill from there. And before people who are from Hammond see this and watch this video and say, oh, you didn't mention Gene Shepard. Well, okay, yeah. So, by the way, Gene Shepard.
What up, Gene Shepard?
Grew up in Hammond, and that's the one who wrote A Christmas Story, the classic movie. So, yeah, Gene Shepard grew up in Hammond. Well, people, it is now that time. What did we learn in this video? We learned that you can't always trust the justifications of building a flood wall, just like how you can't always trust a hospital closure labeled as fiscal protocol, but you can always trust Chris's livability score.
Education.
There are two high schools to look at here, the first one being Hammond Central High School, home of the Wolves. This school actually stands on the property that used to be Hammond High School. That's right, just Hammond High School, no Central. And now there's a brand spanking new beautiful school building standing on the lot called Hammond Central High School. Academically, Hammond Central performs extremely poorly, ranking in the bottom quarter of all of Indiana's high schools. As you can see here, students score poorly overall in all three of the main categories that are measured by US News. On the other hand, Morton High School is on the opposite side of the city from here. It's named after Indiana's 14th governor, and the mascot is the Governors. Go figure. Well, academically, Morton High School unfortunately ranks just as poorly as Hammond Central. I'm not going to screenshot it, just trust me on that one. Education gets a 2 out of 20.
Crime.
The crime here isn't the worst, but it's not the best. The violent crime rate is about double the national average, while the property crime rate is about 1.5 times the national average. Crime gets a 7 out of 20.
Downtown.
Man, downtown when I came through looked dead as ever, my goodness, but I do like the plan that's in place to redevelop downtown. Parts of the plan have already been completed, such as the rehab of the Main Street, and not only do I see potential there, but I actually think that the city is going to follow through with this plan and that it will be a good thing. For now, though, I have to give downtown a 4 out of 20. It would have been even lower if there was no redevelopment plan currently in place.
Economy.
Boy oh boy, the poverty rate is 20%, meaning that 1 out of every 5 residents in Hammond is living in poverty. The home values are low, the population has been declining, and since Hammond hasn't necessarily been the center of industry, rather it's been a bedroom community for blue-collar workers at the factories that are located in the nearby cities, which are all fading away of course, it's really hard to see things turning around here anytime soon. It starts with that downtown redevelopment plan, but after that, there will still be a long way to go. Only 20% of adults in this town, 25 and older, hold a bachelor's degree or higher. Employers see stats like that, and they steer clear of towns with stats like that. Unfortunately for Hammond, businesses will look at Crown Points, Dyer, Munster, or other wealthier suburbs further south, or they'll look over in Illinois at some of the northern suburbs before they look at Hammond. What's that? You don't believe me? Rewind the video and see what Franciscan Health did with their hospital in Hammond. Economy gets a 3 out of 20.
Environment.
Toxic industries surround Hammond to the west, east, and north. In fact, Gary has had 2 Superfund sites along its border with Hammond, as that part of Gary was used for toxic dumps. So this one may not be Hammond's fault, but sometimes life isn't fair, and Hammond gets a 4 out of 20 on the environmental score.
Recreation.
Recreation opportunities are far and few in between. The best thing Hammond has going for it is that it's one of the only places that you can surf in Indiana, and trust me, people go surfing on Lake Michigan up here from time to time. I don't know if I would because of the quality of the water being right next to all of the polluting industries and the Whiting oil refinery, but people do it, and some people don't care. And hey, if that's something that they want to do, I'm not going to stop them. Have fun. Well, Hammond's overall setting is a dense urban sprawl with a strong contrast of polluting industries. There's some nice city parks here and there, but if you're moving to Hammond and you're wanting recreational opportunities, you're not going to like your options. Recreation gets a 5 out of 20.
History.
This is the only score to not go in the red so far. Hammond used to be a lot more prosperous than it is today. The downtown has a really nice collection of buildings. Now they just need an investor to see the potential, buy them up, shape them up, and rent them out, or something like that. Look, Hammond is a crucial part of the identity of the Calumet region, and my oh my, how great would it be for this area if downtown Hammond gets redeveloped as planned. It'll be unheard of. History gets a 14 out of 20.
Amenities.
Depending on which side of town you're in, you could be very close to some shopping, or you could be far away. The further south you are, the better. The very southern edge of Hammond has a rather large shopping center with a Walmart, a Cabela's, some restaurants, and a few other stores. Then Munster, on the border with Hammond, has a Target and a few other stores. The far northern part of Hammond has a Walmart, but not much else to complement it right next to it. And then you have another cluster of stores off of 165th Street between Indianapolis Boulevard and Columbia Avenue. Could be worse, but it also could be much, much better. Amenities gets an 8 out of 20.
Cost of living.
At the time of me making this video, the most expensive listing in Hammond is for $750,000, but it's a multi-unit building. The next most expensive listing is a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom ranch for $364,000, while most of the listings in town are in the $200,000 range. If you're looking to buy a home and you're all set up with a job and a career in the region, you won't have a hard time finding something you can afford in Hammond. Just remember, it's cheap for a reason, especially if you plan on raising kids through the schools in Hammond. Cost of living gets a 20 out of 20. All in all, the Chris Livability score for Hammond, Indiana is 67 out of 180, putting it towards the bottom out of all of the cities that I've done this for so far. Before I forget, I almost did forget, but if you want to see more of what Hammond looks like, make sure to check out my second video on Hammond. The link will be down below once it's uploaded. It will be uploaded to my second channel called Chris Harden's Video Archives, so you can check that out once it's uploaded, and the link will be down below. So what now for Hammond? Well, it's still got some fight left in it. From literal walls to metaphorical ones, this city's been through a lot. Maybe the next time 200,000 cars blow past on the Borman Expressway, maybe a few more of them will stop by and say, hey, maybe Hammond's worth a second look. Maybe they'll be able to check out some of the new exciting stuff going on in downtown. Hopefully that happens. Well, I've actually put together a playlist of other videos that I've made in the region. See everything that I've made from this area right here. Peace.